My name is Tracy Haywood. I'm 32, a mother to a curious 3-year-old named Ethan. And until recently, I thought my life was under control. That illusion shattered the moment my layoff became permanent, my apartment lease expired, and the cost of daycare outstripped every paycheck. Somehow, in a matter of weeks, the independence I had painstakingly built seemed to evaporate. So here I was, back at my parents' house, my life condensed into 2 suitcases and a backpack that smelled faintly of stress and desperation. Mom greeted me at the door, a polite hug that trembled slightly, like she wasn't sure how to handle the sudden intrusion of my failure into her neatly ordered world. Dad carried Ethan's car seat as if it weighed nothing, his face neutral, the expression of a man used to calculating everything except emotion. Monica, my sister, leaned against the hallway wall, her smile sharp and just shy of warmth. "Look at you, Tracy," she said, her voice lightly teasing, "back where you belong. At least you have room service now." Her words weren't a joke. They were a warning. Mom fussed with the casserole she'd pulled from the oven, shoving it onto the counter as if it could distract me from what I already knew, that I was the intruder here. Monica's husband had moved back too, a casualty of their own mismanaged finances. This house, once my childhood refuge, was now a crowded theater of adult lives in varying states of collapse. 2 marriages, schedules clashing like thunderclouds, 1 small boy whose laughter cut through the tension, and me, an unwelcome extra in the symphony of chaos. I tried to stay quiet, almost invisible, cleaning floors and dishes as if my effort could be measured in invisible points that might buy me tolerance. Monica, meanwhile, filled the air with her little triumphs. She would tap a glass at dinner and casually mention interest rates, emergency funds, Dad's secret savings. "You know, Dad," she'd say, light as air, "you've got to keep the rainy day envelope ready." She loved the way he nodded, and I learned quickly to look down at my plate, counting Ethan's peas while he hid 2 in his fist, smirking like a tiny accomplice. I told myself I'd be gone soon. 2 months, maybe 3. A temporary setback, a pause in a life I'd assumed would continue smoothly. But the house had a way of reminding me that I was an outsider. The doorways whispered disdain when I entered. Mom's sighs carried more weight than any words, and Monica's lowered voice in my presence made the air itself seem too thin to breathe. I tried to prove myself. I did laundry when Mom complained of her back, ran errands when Dad's truck needed washing. Competence, I hoped, might speak a language they still remembered. And yet the undercurrent of resentment never wavered, flowing quietly in their gazes, their half-smiles, the way conversations paused when I spoke. 2 months into my temporary stay, morning broke like any other. Burned pancakes for me, perfect circles for Ethan. I took him to the park to keep from being underfoot, letting the wind carry away my tension as he swung higher and higher, his laughter ringing across the empty playground. We returned home to a silence that felt heavier than the day's first light. The front door was ajar, too quiet. Mom sat in the kitchen, clutching a mug as if it could hold her nerves together. Dad stepped into the hallway, holding a thick envelope by the corner. Careful, deliberate. His eyes didn't flicker. His tone was even when he said, "You stole from us. Get out." The words hovered. They didn't land immediately. The air seemed to delay their impact. I laughed, an automatic reflex to hide terror. "What?" Monica's soft, careful voice entered, eyes fixed somewhere between empathy and calculation. I was looking for my hairbrush in your dresser. Didn't mean to invade your privacy, Tracy, but I found Dad's emergency cash. All of it." Her head tilted toward the envelope. "Over $10,000. My throat went dry. "That isn't mine," I said, words strangled by disbelief. Dad didn't ask, didn't pause. He moved through the house like he was sweeping away trash, my belongings, Ethan's toys, the baby monitor I sometimes pretended we still needed. The black trash bag he used crackled with each item he tossed in. I froze, tried to explain, tried to show proof. Monica murmured, You always were the clever one, her voice pitched for Dad to hear, laced with mockery disguised as concern. My heart pounded, and I realized that in one evening I'd gone from daughter to intruder, from mother to accused thief, in the eyes of the people who were supposed to protect me. Outside, the air cut like a knife, sharp enough to make honesty visible. Ethan clung to my hip, tired, sticky, unaware of the storm of adult judgment swirling around him. I had $40 in my purse, 2 suitcases, and a bag full of discarded dignity. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I walked to the bus stop, feeling the weight of disbelief press on my shoulders, and sat, watching the cold light flicker against the street. For the first time, I understood how it felt to be invisible in your own family story. And I knew, somehow, that this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Ethan's little feet padding across the hallway. His giggles were the only thing keeping me tethered to any sense of calm. I made him breakfast while trying to ignore the gnawing weight in my chest. The memory of my dad's cold voice and Monica's carefully rehearsed sympathy. Mom hovered nearby, pretending to sip her coffee while casting glances at me that were too quick, too guarded. She said nothing about the previous night, and I didn't expect her to. Words weren't what had thrown us out. They were a gesture of convenience, a silent agreement that the lie had become easier than truth. I was invisible, not in a subtle, unnoticed way, but in a way that made every move I made under scrutiny feel pointless. Monica's presence was a constant hum of tension. She had mastered the art of being everywhere and nowhere, her voice filling the spaces where questions might rise. She talked loudly at the kitchen table about interest rates and emergency funds, about Dad's hidden savings, as if reminding him he was beholden to her intellect. I kept my eyes on Ethan, trying to remember the small joys in his world. 2 peas in a fist, a dinosaur standing guard on the table, because the big world, the adult one, was collapsing around me. I told myself repeatedly that this was temporary. 2 months, 3 at most. I would earn back my footing. I would find work, secure daycare, regain independence. But each day in that house chipped away at my resolve. Monica's pointed comments, subtle digs at my inability to keep pace with her financial acumen, gnawed at my patience. One evening, she leaned over the kitchen counter, tapping the rim of her wine glass. "Dad, don't you think it's time Tracy learned how to manage her budget?" I stared at my plate, counting the number of raisins in Ethan's oatmeal instead of responding. Dad nodded as always, and the briefest flash of pride flickered in Monica's eyes. It wasn't about the budget. It was about dominance, about control disguised as care. I tried to navigate the tightrope of invisibility. I did laundry without complaint, cooked meals without drawing attention, and avoided confrontations that would only remind them that I existed. But in every corner, in every hallway, Monica's presence reminded me that I had already lost. Her every word, every glance, seemed designed to remind me that I was dispensable, that even my child's tiny needs could be ignored if they conflicted with her agenda. Ethan, blissfully unaware of the storm swirling around him, found joy in small victories. He stacked blocks just to knock them down, raced across the living room with his toy dinosaur, and demanded pancakes with a fervor that reminded me why I fought to hold our little life together. But even in his laughter, I felt the tension pressing in, the unspoken accusation that somehow we didn't belong here, that I was already failing as a mother simply by being accused of something I didn't do. The pivotal moment came quietly. It wasn't a scream or a fight, but a question, a casual, insidious question from Monica at dinner. "So, Tracy," she said, her tone light as air, "how's the family emergency fund these days?" "Still learning the ropes." I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth, realizing that she had already planted the seed. She wasn't asking for advice. She was crafting suspicion. The envelope from Dad's hidden stash wasn't missing yet, but Monica's words had already begun to shape the narrative in his mind. Her carefully cultivated concern made her look like the responsible one, the reasonable sister, while I became the quiet, trembling subject of doubt. I tried to speak up, to assure Dad that I had never touched anything, that I had no interest in the money he kept tucked away. But Monica's timing, her poised expression, and her subtle gestures undermined every word I tried to offer. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that seemed harmless but carried the weight of a trap waiting to snap. Days passed in this slow-burning tension. I moved carefully, Ethan in tow, navigating the minefield of glances and whispers. Every time I entered a room, I could feel Monica's eyes on me, weighing me, measuring me, ready to report every misstep. It was exhausting. Every act of competence I offered was either ignored or twisted into a reason to cast doubt. And then the day came when I realized just how carefully Monica had been orchestrating everything. It wasn't an accident that Dad's emergency fund appeared missing, that I was being subtly isolated, and that Ethan's small joys were constantly disrupted by undercurrents of adult manipulation. She had planned it all. The envelope would be found, my belongings would be deemed disposable, and the narrative of a mother who stole from her own family would be set in motion, all without ever lifting a finger in overt confrontation. By the time I tucked Ethan into bed that night, exhaustion had replaced hope. I held him close, breathing in the scent of his hair, trying to memorize his small, trusting face. He had no idea that the world I had promised to protect him from was already shaping itself against us. And I knew that when the accusation came, the one Monica had been laying the groundwork for, it wouldn't just be about money. It would be about my place in the family, my worth, and the fragile thread of dignity I still clung to. I fell asleep with a tight knot in my stomach, knowing that the storm wasn't coming. It was already here. Monica had set it in motion, and all I could do was wait, silently, for the moment it would hit. The morning began like any other. Ethan was asleep a little longer than usual, curled up in his blanket, and I was halfway through a cup of coffee, savoring a few minutes of peace. But peace, I was learning, in this house was a fragile illusion. I didn't have to wait long for it to shatter. Dad's voice, calm and even, carried down the hallway before I could even finish a sip. "Tracy, we need to talk." I set my mug down slowly, careful not to make a sound that would betray my unease. Ethan stirred, yawning, rubbing his eyes. I held him close as I followed my dad into the living room. The air felt heavier than usual, weighted with certainty that something had shifted. Monica stood nearby, arms folded, her face composed, rehearsed, the kind of composure that hides intent behind a mask. Dad held an envelope in his hands, thick and unassuming, but I recognized it instantly. My stomach dropped. My heart pounded in the hollow space where trust had once lived. He didn't speak as he handed it toward me. His eyes were colder than I had ever seen them. There was no accusation in the tilt of his jaw, no argument in his posture. It was something worse, decision, finality. "You stole from us," he said flat. The words didn't echo. They landed like stones in the quiet room. "Get out of my house." For a second, I thought I must have misheard. My mind tried to rearrange the words, to find a different meaning, a loophole that would explain the impossible. Could not touch that money. I knew its weight in our household, how sacred it had been in my father's eyes. I had been scrupulously careful in every interaction with his finances, every envelope, every drawer. "Dad, please," I started, my voice trembling. I didn't. But he didn't listen. Monica stepped forward, a faint sympathy in her tone that didn't reach her eyes. "I was looking for my hairbrush," she said. "In your dresser, Tracy. I didn't mean to invade your privacy, but I found Dad's emergency cash." Her tilt of the head, her half-smile, was enough to tip the scales. The envelope, the money, the suspicion, it all rested on her performance. I opened my mouth, but the words didn't come. I wanted to explain, to show Dad the truth, to prove that I had nothing to do with it, but the moment had passed. He turned, and without another word, began gathering our belongings. My shoes, Ethan's toys, the baby monitor. Items of our life here were stuffed into black trash bags, discarded as if they were worthless. I clutched Ethan to my chest, his tiny arms wrapped around me, his fingers curling into my sweater. "Mommy," he whispered, sensing the tension, though not its reason. My chest ached. I had never felt so powerless. I tried reasoning. Check the cameras. Fingerprints. I'll go with you to the bank. Anything. My voice shook. I had no proof yet, but my innocence was invisible. Monica's quiet murmurs, perfectly pitched so only Dad could hear, suggested I was the clever one, asking for time to cover my crime. And in that moment, Dad didn't hesitate. He had already decided. The bag split when I lifted it. Ethan's stuffed bear rolled under the table. I didn't pick it up. My hands felt numb, as though the reality of being rejected, dismissed, and accused had frozen them. Monica leaned against the doorway, her whisper cutting through the silence. Good luck surviving, loser. Might build character. I stepped outside, the cold air biting through my sweater, and tried to steady my breathing. $40 in my purse, Ethan on my hip, a torn bag of discarded possessions at my feet. My heart beat in hollow rhythms. The street was empty, but the weight of betrayal filled every inch of space between the sidewalk and the sky. We walked slowly to the bus stop. Ethan rested his head against my shoulder, his small body exhausted by confusion and fatigue. I thought of calling a friend, a relative, anyone who might understand. But I remembered why those options had failed before. I had nowhere safe to land except myself. And yet I refused to fall. I refused to let their judgment define the life I was trying to hold together. The bus arrived, its engine sighing to a halt like a reluctant witness. I held Ethan tight and climbed aboard. In the flickering window, I saw my reflection, a woman accused, dismissed, and discarded. The word thief hovered over my image like a label someone else had assigned, a false identity stitched onto my skin. I kissed Ethan's hair and whispered promises of safety that I didn't know I could keep. At the last stop, Uncle Rick's number was the only lifeline I had memorized with certainty. I called him, voice breaking as the story tumbled out in jagged pieces. The envelope, Dad's decision, Monica's smirk, the trash bags of our lives. "Come stay with me," he said without hesitation. "No questions, no lectures about pride, just a place." He sent the address and gate code. My heart loosened slightly, a fragile tether to hope I hadn't felt in days. By the time we arrived at his house, the sun was setting. Rick opened the door and took Ethan from my arms as if he weighed nothing. The guest room, soft-lit and quiet, became a sanctuary I hadn't known I needed. I felt the first taste of relief, though it was bittersweet, marinated in humiliation and disbelief. I lay with Ethan asleep beside me, watching the porch light carve a perfect square on the lawn. Somewhere in the world, Monica had achieved her goal. She had erased me, at least for a moment, from my own family. But here, in the quiet, I began to remember that life isn't just about survival. It's about choosing what and who we fight for. The storm wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Monica had played her hand, and Dad had chosen to believe her. But I had a new ally, a safe place, and a child whose laughter reminded me of what mattered. Outside, the night settled around us, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the guest house windows, turning the dust motes into tiny sparks. Ethan was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor, building a precarious tower of blocks. His laughter, high and bright, was a stark contrast to the heavy tension still clinging to my chest. I poured coffee, trying to anchor myself with its warmth. Rick had gone into his office, promising he'd handle the rest, but I could feel the energy of reckoning settling in the air. I didn't have to wait long. Rick emerged from his office, holding a stack of papers and a small USB drive. He had that look, calm, deliberate, as if he already knew how the day would end but wanted me to experience it with him. "Tracy," he said softly, "we need to go over what happened at your parents' house. There's more to the story than you know." I sat down slowly, Ethan's stuffed dinosaur tucked under my arm. I didn't trust myself to speak yet. Rick began to explain how he'd been watching small inconsistencies in the family's finances for months. Withdrawals that didn't match bills, petty cash discrepancies, vendor names that didn't add up. He had suspected something long before Monica planted the envelope in my drawer. "She's careful," Rick said, leaning back in his chair, too careful, but not careful enough to escape a pattern. I held my breath as he plugged the USB into his laptop. The screen flickered, and there it was. Grainy footage from a security camera I had forgotten existed, positioned discreetly in the hallway outside the bedrooms. The timestamp matched the night I was accused. And there she was, Monica, moving quietly, almost delicately as if rehearsed. Her hand slipped into my dresser, and the envelope she had planted slid inside. She glanced around before leaving, ensuring no one witnessed her deception. I felt my stomach twist. She really did it," I whispered. My voice trembled, fragile against the weight of the truth. Rick paused the video, showing me Monica's expression. Calculated, calm, a mask that hid the intentions behind her actions. "She didn't just want you out," he said quietly. "She wanted to erase you from this house, from their perception of reality. And she almost succeeded." I sank back, letting Ethan rest his head against my shoulder. The betrayal stung in new ways now, sharper than the initial accusation. It wasn't just the false blame. It was the deliberate effort to manipulate, to remove me from my own life. Rick turned to me, tone steady, eyes firm. "You have proof. You have everything you need to confront them, or not. That choice is yours." I thought about Dad's cold stare, the way he had believed Monica, without question. The weight of that accusation had thrown us out into the street with nothing but a few bags and a tiny purse. But I also thought about Ethan, safe and warm in Rick's guest room, and the fragile peace we were building. "I want her to panic first," I said finally. My voice was quiet but resolved. "I don't need revenge. I just want her to see what she's done." Rick smiled faintly, a mixture of approval and relief. "Good. Sometimes silence is the loudest punishment." Over the next day, we watched quietly. Rick made a few calls, subtle but strategic, freezing accounts, suspending access to company funds, notifying contractors that payments would be delayed until audits were complete. Monica's carefully curated online world began to crumble. Contractors left unfinished projects, credit cards were declined, and her husband's loan was denied. Every step she had taken to maintain control of the family's narrative started falling apart. I didn't post anything, didn't call anyone. I simply watched the ripple effect unfold from the safety of Rick's home. I let the truth work for itself. I realized that control isn't about shouting the facts. It's about letting them land in their own time, like stones thrown into still water, ripples reaching further than any single shout could manage. That evening, I sat on the porch, Ethan building towers of blocks on the rug beside me, his tiny hands shaping the world without thought of betrayal or accusation. I watched the sunset, the light casting soft shadows across the garden. Peace, I realized, wasn't about immediate satisfaction or visible triumph. It was about reclaiming the quiet authority over my own life, the knowledge that the truth would emerge, and that I was no longer at the mercy of lies. Rick came out later, coffee in hand, and sat beside me. "It's unfolding exactly as it should," he said softly. "She thought she could manipulate reality, but you've built a life based on truth. That always has a way of catching up." I nodded, exhausted but centered. For the first time in months, I felt the weight in my chest shift. It wasn't light, betrayal leaves scars, but it wasn't suffocating either. I had space to breathe, to plan, to live, and to protect Ethan from the chaos that had once defined our days. And somewhere, far away, Monica's careful constructs were collapsing, one calculated move at a time. I didn't need to intervene. I just needed to survive, to witness, and to let the consequences of her choices speak for themselves. For Ethan, for myself, and for the life we were quietly reclaiming, this was enough. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, soft and unassuming, but I could feel the tension vibrating beneath it. The quiet of Rick's house was almost deafening after the chaos at my parents' home, but it felt safe. Ethan ran around the living room, scattering wooden blocks like tiny soldiers, unaware that the world outside was already starting to unravel for Monica. I poured myself a coffee, letting the warmth steady my shaking hands. Rick emerged from his office with a calm expression, almost as if the storm outside didn't exist. "It's time," he said simply, placing a thin folder on the table. The stack contained every shred of proof: audit reports, screenshots, bank statements, and the paused frame from the security footage showing Monica planting the envelope in my drawer. I stared at it, a mixture of disbelief and vindication settling in my chest. "She didn't just want you gone," Rick said softly. "She wanted to erase the evidence, erase herself from accountability. And she almost succeeded. But now it's all documented." I felt a quiet satisfaction, not the fiery desire for revenge I had imagined. I wasn't here to destroy her. I was here to witness the truth land where it belonged. "Good," I whispered. "Let her feel the consequences." By mid-morning, the ripple effect had begun. Monica tried to access the family accounts to make transfers, only to find her attempts blocked. Contractors began calling the office, frustrated over unpaid invoices, and her husband's loan application was declined. Social media, once her stage for curated perfection, was silent. The web she had spun with confidence and care was unraveling, and I didn't have to lift a finger. I could picture her pacing through the house, face pale, phone clutched in hand, searching for someone, anyone who would come to her aid. But the silence surrounding her schemes was deafening. I realized that for all her careful manipulation, she hadn't counted on someone like Rick. Late that afternoon, I got a text from Rick. "They're ready. Dinner tonight." I felt a tight knot in my stomach, the kind that comes when a reckoning is imminent. I dressed simply: dark jeans, a cream blouse, nothing flashy, nothing designed to provoke. I wanted to enter as myself, steady and unshaken. Ethan stayed with Rick, and I took a deep breath before stepping into the car. Driving back to my parents' house felt surreal. Everything looked smaller somehow. Trees, the driveway, even the house itself. The half-finished renovations Monica had bragged about online now looked abandoned, a perfect reflection of the life she had tried to manipulate. When I arrived, Mom opened the door, her eyes red, makeup smudged. Dad stood behind her, jaw tight. Monica sat stiffly, hands folded, face pale. Her husband tried to blend in, but the tension made him stand out like a sore thumb. The silence was thick enough to taste. I sat down at the dining table, the past months of chaos pressed into every corner of the room. Mom finally spoke, voice trembling. "Tracy, I owe you an apology. We believed the wrong person. I let fear and pride blind me." Her words hung in the air, heavy and fragile. Monica's voice was soft, almost fragile. "It was me," she admitted, head down, hands fidgeting. "I took the money. I planted it. I wanted you gone. I lied." The words were raw, stripped of pretense. And Sheila's eyes widened. Dad didn't move. Silence stretched between us, almost merciful. I realized in that moment that revenge would have been satisfying, but it wouldn't heal me. I didn't need apologies, not from her, not from anyone. I had reclaimed my life, and that was worth more than any words could give. Monica's shoulders sank. "Everything's falling apart. The money, the house, the company. I deserve this." Dad leaned forward, rubbing his temples. "I don't know how to fix this," he muttered, but I shook my head, calm and steady. "Home? There's no starting over. You threw me out into the street with my child because it was easier to believe a lie than the truth. I've already moved on." Mom cried quietly. "We just want our family back," she whispered. But I knew family isn't a word that can be rebuilt with apologies alone. Family is what you protect when it matters, And when it mattered, they didn't protect me. Monica's voice cracked. "Can you ever forgive me?" I looked at her, my voice steady. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's deciding your mistakes won't control me anymore. I can't forget, and I'm not coming back." Dad's frustration flickered across his face. "We're still your parents." "I know," I said softly, "but that doesn't mean I owe you my piece of myself." I stood. The chair scraped against the tile, echoing in the unfinished room. "Thank you for dinner," I said simply. "I hope you find what you're looking for." No one tried to stop me. Mom whispered, broken, "Tracy, please." But I didn't look back. Outside, the air felt clean, honest. I had survived the storm they created. And for the first time, I realized they needed me more than I ever needed them. When I got back to Rick's house, Ethan was asleep in his arms on the couch. I sat beside him, feeling the quiet settle over us. Rick gave me a small, knowing smile. "How was it?" "Quiet," I said. "The kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed, not from victory, but from release. Because freedom isn't given, it's earned." That night, I tucked Ethan into bed and watched him drift to sleep. The tension, the fear, the betrayal, all of it began to loosen in the space of our new life. For the first time in months, I felt the woman who had been thrown out transform into the woman who had walked away. The morning after the dinner felt different, lighter, quieter, almost impossibly still. The storm that had lived inside my chest for months had finally burned itself out, leaving only the soft warmth of freedom. I made coffee, sunlight spilling across the countertops, turning the kitchen into a small sanctuary. Ethan toddled in, rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up like he had wrestled with dreams. "Mommy, can we go outside?" he asked, eyes bright despite the early hour. I smiled and nodded, letting him lead the way into the backyard. The air was crisp, the garden bathed in gentle light, and for the first time, I felt at peace without constantly looking over my shoulder. Rick had already prepared breakfast, pancakes stacked neatly, syrup on the side. He gestured to the coffee and newspaper with a calm familiarity. "You looked done fighting," he said quietly. I nodded. I was. Not because revenge had been served, not because Monica had fallen, but because I had taken back my life. In the days that followed, I began settling into our new rhythm. Ethan and I moved into Rick's guest house, a bright little space with soft yellow walls, sunlight through skylights, and a fenced garden perfect for him to run free. I painted the walls, hung a few pictures, arranged furniture with a deliberate care that felt like reclaiming territory I had always deserved. The house wasn't big, but it was ours, and every corner breathed safety. Work became steady, small design contracts that grew into something reliable. I reveled in the simple routine. Breakfast together, work calls, afternoon walks, bedtime stories. Every small task was a quiet act of rebuilding. I watched Ethan's imagination bloom in this safe space, laughter echoing off walls that knew no cruelty. From time to time, I thought about my parents' house, the one where my name had been weaponized against me. Renovations stopped, contractors refused to return, and Monica and her husband's lives began unspooling exactly as karma intended. Her social media went dark, her confidence gone, and the company funds she had mismanaged were frozen. I didn't feel satisfaction, only distance, the kind that protects, not punishes. Rick often dropped by with small gestures of kindness, a box of pastries, a new book for Ethan, an encouraging word for me. "You've done it," he said one Sunday, smiling faintly. "Done what?" I asked, curious. "Stop surviving. Start living," he said simply. I laughed quietly. Took me long enough. He leaned against the doorway, looking over at Ethan building towers in the sunroom. Sometimes freedom doesn't come with a bang. Sometimes it's just the sound of peace in your own home. I thought about that a lot. Peace wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady, the sound of not constantly fighting for validation or recognition. It was the laughter of my child, the warmth of a home where I was safe, the knowledge that I didn't have to answer to anyone who had doubted me. Weeks passed. Each morning brought sunlight, coffee, and the rhythm of life, rebuilt piece by piece. I allowed myself to feel joy again, small and tentative at first, then bold and unapologetic. Ethan's creativity flourished. He painted, played, laughed without the shadow of fear or tension looming over him. I thrived alongside him, my work gaining momentum, my confidence growing with every design I completed. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the garden, I paused to watch Ethan chase butterflies. Rick joined me, silent for a while, just watching the quiet joy in the backyard. "You've done well," he said finally. "Not because you fought back, but because you refused to be broken." I nodded, feeling the truth in that. Monica's consequences continued without my intervention. Every failed transfer, every frozen account, every contractor walking off the job reminded me that actions have weight. But I didn't need to witness it all. Let the universe handle her, I thought. I had my life to nurture. That night, I tucked Ethan into bed, his small hand clutching his favorite dinosaur. He murmured, half asleep, "Mommy, it's our home." "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered, brushing his hair back. "It's our home." For the first time in months, I felt safe. Not because someone protected me, not because revenge was served, but because I had protected myself and reclaimed my life. Freedom had a sound, quiet breathing, soft laughter, a child's contented sigh. I went to the window and looked out at the faint glow of the porch light. The old house in my neighborhood, the one where I had been thrown out, looked smaller now, weathered and half abandoned. I thought about knocking, about saying something, but I realized some circles don't need closing. They need letting go. And so I let go. I drove on, the night stretching open ahead of me, wide, quiet, full of possibility. Monica, my parents, the drama, the lies they were behind me. Ahead lay peace, security, and the life I had fought for, piece by piece, day by day. Ethan stirred awake in the back seat. "Mommy," he mumbled sleepily. "Who lives there now?" "Just some people we used to know," I said softly, smiling. He nodded, satisfied, and fell back asleep. I exhaled, a slow, steady breath, the kind that fills every corner of your chest. The storm had passed, but its lessons remained. I didn't get revenge. I got something better. Freedom, peace, and a future entirely my own. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed in quiet happiness again.